Welcome to the Fantasy Football Fanalist Podcast, presented by Fantasy Data. Here's your hosts, Billy Muzio and Bradley Stalder.
Welcome back, everybody, to Fantasy Football Fanalist Podcast, presented by Fantasy Data. Billy Muzio here with Bradley Stalder. It's officially July, and that means more of us.
Hey, here we go.
Whether you like it or not, we're here to stay. Team projections as well, analysis, and league-winning takes. Let's kick off 2020 with the Arizona Cardinals here, Bradley.
Absolutely. We'll start with their play caller, Kyler Murray. And Kyler Murray took the exact leap the fantasy managers hoped for in 2020. He rushed 40 more times. He got 250 more yards. He had 11 rushing scores. His passing was elevated. You know, when you get DeAndre Hopkins added to your wide receiver core, of course it's going to elevate your passing numbers. He had 6 more passing touchdowns and what seemed to be better finishes to drives. Kyler Murray had the third best red zone completion percentage among QBs. And of course, that was an improvement from 2019. And it was only a mid-season shoulder injury that came between Murray and being the quarterback 1 overall. Instead, he finishes the quarterback 3. But there's a lot of optimism going into 2021. Murray possesses the exact formula for week-winning ceiling. He had 5 games of 3 or more passing touchdowns, and he had 11 games of at least 30 rushing yards. And Murray's receivers, they helped him out this past season. They dropped the fewest passes among any quarterback who played all 16 games last season. And while that stat's due for regression, we'll see drops happen. We can't ignore how Kyler is pretty much a top 12 quarterback in every efficiency metric and every advanced category. He's a consistent top-tier quarterback. He possesses the ever-valuable Konami code, and he's my quarterback 3 entering 2021. I have a Kyler Murray projected for 28 passing touchdowns, 13 interceptions, 132 rush attempts, 795 rushing yards, and 9 rushing touchdowns.
Yeah, I like those projections, Bradley. Kind of taking a look at mine here as well. We're very close in terms of attempts. I'm at 588 attempts this year for Kyler Murray. I have at 389 completions for 66% completion percentage. I'm a little bit more bearish in terms of the yardage this year for Kyler Murray. I'm at 4,394 yards. I do have a couple more touchdowns, though, with 30 touchdowns and 16 interceptions this year, and around the same rushing stats, though. 124 rushing attempts, 719 rushing yards, and 7 touchdowns. Taking a look at his 2020 finishes here, he finished 2020 as quarterback 2. He finished with as 12th best quarterback in passing touchdowns. That's 26 passing touchdowns. Passing yards is 13th. And Bradley touched base on kind of the large scale of his metrics and where he finished. And I just want to break down some of these numbers for the listeners. So passing yards, 13th in the league with 3,971. He was 18th in deep ball completion percentage at 40.0. And then he had air yards per game. He was 15th with 268.2 air yards per game. And then interceptable passes per game was 6th best in the league with 1.2. Kyler Murray is my quarterback 3 for the year as well. And I'm looking forward to a great 2021 for Kyler Murray.
Do you believe Kyler Murray when he said this past offseason that he would run less and he would not take his legs for granted? Do you think he's going to pass a little bit more this year?
I kind of hedged it. I gave him a few more attempts, but simply because of the 17-game season. I don't fully believe it. I think he's going to, when push comes to shove and that pocket's collapsing, I think he's going to revert to what he knows best, and that is to, tuck the ball and just take off. He does have, a few more weapons this year, I think, as well. So it'll be interesting to see how this offense shakes out. The addition of Moore, they still have Kirk there. I know they added, the ghost of AJ Green. We'll see how all of that pans out, but he may be able to just, rely more on those targets. But I think that when push comes to shove, I think he will rely on the legs.
I think so too. He's 5'10". He's not going to get any bigger. And that's where his bread and butter's been over the last few years. And I think there's a very high floor for Kyler. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes. As you said, his interceptable passes was very low at that rate. So I think that he's a very safe pick at the beginning of drafts. I know some are taking him in the 5th round. It just depends on what your league settings are, but he's a very safe pick among your top tier of quarterbacks. We'll now move into there's no quarterback controversy in Arizona. So there's only one quarterback we'll talk about, but there are a couple running backs that we'll talk about. And first is running back James Conner, who signed a 1-year deal with the Cardinals after departing from the Steelers running back core. Now, James Conner has never averaged less than 4 yards per carry in a season in his career, despite struggling with injuries each season. He's missed 12 games over the past 3 seasons, so we've seen that creep into his RB finishes. He has finished as RB7, RB33, and RB27 over the past 3 seasons. Removing the 3 games, though, that Conner left early from, he averaged almost 70 rushing yards on about 14 rushes per game, and he was useful in the passing game with 7 of those games where he caught at least 3 passes. Conner was the running back 23 for receptions despite missing 3 games and also leaving 3 games early. So he has the pass catching capability. He was 15th among all running backs in juke rate at 25.5%. And he still evaded the 15th most tackles amongst running backs, once again, despite missing 3 games and leaving 3 others early. He was 20th among running backs in yards created per game, 22nd among running backs in yards created per attempt. So he still has it, despite being injured and despite the inconsistencies that surround that narrative that surrounds Conner. It still seems that he, like when you dive into the metrics, he still has a lot of talent to offer. And when on the field, he's explosive. He tied DeAndre Swift last season for 10th among running backs in breakaway rate. This is a player who can really get down the field. And if you're a contender in Dynasty and you need a 1-year rental or you need a high ceiling running back for a value, James Conner is this perfect target. He's my running back 21 going into 2021. And I project him to miss more than 2 games this year. And despite that, he's still my running back 21.
Yeah, taking a look at his game logs last year, he only started 2 games last year. He did play 16, so he was playing banged up most of the year. He ended up as running back 23 here in 2020. He ended up as 24th in touchdowns with 6th rushing yards. He was 20th with 720. You already talked about his juke rate and breakaway rate. The area that he underperformed in were drops. He did have 4 drops last season, but that's not his role in this offense. That's the Chase Edmonds role, which is a perfect pairing in my mind for.
Although to be fair,
Cardinals.
all of the Pittsburgh Steelers struggled with drops last season.
That is true. Deontay Johnson, especially,
or Eric Ebron.
yeah. So maybe it's Big Ben. Let's just blame Big Ben. So, but nonetheless, drops were a concern here for James Conner. Looking at my 2021 projections here, I have this backfield split more than most anticipate, just because I think that James Conner is going to slide into that Drake role. I just don't expect Chase to just walk in and get 200 touches like some are expecting him to lead this 1-2 down as well as third down back. He's just not built to be a workhorse back. But James Conner here I have at 188 rushing attempts, 808 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns, 6% target share in this offense. That's going to be 36 targets, 27 receptions, with a 75% catch rate, with another 203 yards in the air, with another 2 scores. That's good for 188 fantasy points in full PPR with 12 points per game in this offense.
I am a little more bullish than you on Conner. I threw about 16 more rush attempts his way, which gives him, about 70 more rushing yards. And I bumped up about 2% target share from you. So I have him at 8%. The Arizona Cardinals had an 18.4% running back target share last season, and I had projected for about 19%. So it's roughly in the ballpark there. I felt comfortable giving him that. And so that adds up to just more opportunity, I think, with Conner. As you mentioned, I don't think Chase Edmonds has a grip of the 1-2 role, and that's ultimately why Kenyon Drake was not interested in re-signing, and I don't think the Arizona Cardinals were interested in him either, given that he was limited in the 1-2 role last season. So I agree with you. He's probably going to fit in that role again. Okay, but we'll take a second and talk about Chase Edmonds. And I believe that, yes, 2 top 30-ish or so running backs can coexist in this backfield on this same team, because the offense is really good and they're an above average pace of play team, especially if we project Chase Edmonds to take over the lion's share work if and when Connor misses time. Like if we project that Connor misses a couple games, Edmonds will very much produce for fantasy. And outside of those 2 games, Edmonds didn't have double-digit carries last season. However, he was effective as the third down receiving back with 8 of 16 games with at least 5 targets. 5 targets for Chase Edmonds, and that was half of his games. In 2020, Edmonds finished quietly as the running back 25 in PPR, despite not eclipsing 100 rushing attempts. And I expect this rushing to go up during the season, like compared to last year. So I have Chase Edmonds projected for 131 rushes. But Edmonds just is not, he's not an efficient or advanced metric superior runner. He is 42nd in juke rate amongst running backs, 41st in evaded tackles, 46th in yards created per game, 42nd in yards created per attempt. Look, he's about as explosive based on his breakaway rate as Connor, but those are pretty pedestrian running back advanced metrics. He may outpace Connor in fantasy points. Like, that's within the range of outcomes. I don't think that that's unreasonable, but it's not due to the rushing. I don't think that the Cardinals, as we mentioned before, are going to trust Edmonds to be a 15 to 18 carry guy per game. He finished 7th among running backs in receptions, and I think that's the role he's going to continue to hold going forward. 7th in receptions, 6th in targets, where his counterpart, Kenyon Drake, finished 34th. So let's see how James Conner will fit in. I think that that's going to be about the right placement for Conner in the passing game as well, in the mid 30s for targets. I think we'll see a similar split as last year, and I'll lean Connor's nose for the end zone. It just seems like he finds a way to get in when he's on the field. And if I'm picking a running back for the season to score more points, I think it's going to be Conner. But Edmonds is very valuable, I think, in especially leagues where running backs are rewarded for catching points, catching passes. And he's my running back 31. I could see a little higher if we hear more news of his involvement rushing.
Rob, before I jump in here to the Edmonds talk, we did have a question from a listener here. He said, so is DeAndre Hopkins going to get his, or DeAndre Hopkins going to get his, is the only value with the other wide receivers and best ball only? We will touch on that as we get to the wide receivers, but just wanted to show the comments, and then I want to kind of follow back up here on Bradley. So Chase Edmonds, the area that he did really excel was on his limited touches that he had here for Arizona Cardinals. He actually was 5th in the league overall. It's the only real efficiency metrics that he excelled in, and it was points per attempt, fantasy points per attempt. He was the 5th running back overall with 1.73 fantasy points per attempt. Why? Well, part of it could have been it was skewed by the amount of carries that he actually had. But when he did have it, he was pretty explosive in the plays that he did get his opportunities. Looking at my projections here for 2021, I have him at 166 rushing attempts. So I have him slightly higher than you, about 30 extra carries. I have him for 764 yards, so almost 200 rushing yards more than you have him projected for. 5 touchdowns, so an extra touchdown on the ground. We're pretty similar in target share. So I'm at 12%. At 73 targets with 53 receptions with 73% catch rate with 324 yards and 4 receiving touchdowns. I do think he gets it done through the air here in this offense, especially if Kyler wants to just dump it off instead of opting to run. And then that equates to 216 fantasy points in full PPR leagues with 13 fantasy points per game. Like I said, though, these two players are closer than they're being drafted at. I mean, we're seeing James Conner going, 3-4 rounds later than Chase Edmonds in a lot of these FFPC drafts. And whenever that happens, I'm the kind of guy that likes to wait for the ladder. Common example is always like Ayuk versus Debo, right? Or last year it was always wait on the later running back for the Niners, and it was always McKinnon for me. I just kept waiting, and so most of the times it pans out because you get these deep values, and that's what I'm doing this year with the Arizona Cardinals. I tend to be passing on Chase Edmonds at ADP, which is mid round 5, and I've been just find myself grabbing Connor occasionally on the later ADP.
Essentially, like, Chase Edmonds is being drafted at least pretty close to his ceiling. Like, he's being drafted, you mentioned, in the 5th round or so, and I can't imagine him getting up into that upper echelon of top consistently, even back end running back 1 category without a long-term James Conner injury. And even so, like, maybe the Cardinals signed someone else to plot. It was very clear that the Cardinals signed James Conner for a reason, and it's to fill that particular role. If they wanted Chase Edmonds to be the lead back, then they would have not signed someone like James Conner.
What's up, Jamario in the house?
How you doing, Jamario? Wonderful. Well, that puts a bow on the running backs and quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals. We'll transition to segue between those positions with Bradley's Deep Cut of the Week, brought to you by Grocery Outlet Bargain Market.
Grocery Outlet Bargain Market. Welcome to Bargain Bliss.
Imagine 2 young wide receivers on the same team, both drafted in consecutive years, both 23 years old, both at least 6'4", both within 0.2 of a year of breakout age of each other, both with at least 87th percentile speed scores, but one has a 54.7% college dominator rating. And yes, that is the 98th percentile. And the other couldn't outpace Amon-Ra St. Brown at USC his senior year. Which one would you choose? Well, I took it to Twitter, and the Twitter followers responded that 61% of
Twitter sphere.
The Twitter sphere. Yes, shout out to our followers. 61% of the Twitter followers polled selected the newest member of the Colts wide receiver corps. That's right, Mike Strachan, instead of the other wide receiver, Michael Pittman Jr. So 61% to 39%. And look, he is the hottest commodity right now on the sleeper waiver wire. And you're thinking to yourself, well, Bradley, why are you just catching the wave? Mike Strachan's already been picked up in my leagues. But if you've been following me, a week after the draft, May 9th, I sent out a flurry of tweets saying, go get Mike Strachan. Mike Strachan is the player you want to pick up at the end of your rookie drafts. I've been preaching how you should have already gotten Mike Strachan if you were listening to me. And look, after he was drafted in real life by the Colts, Strachan said in an interview that he was the missing piece for the Colts. And he's probably right. They are missing an alpha. Much to Billy's chagrin, Michael Pittman Jr. isn't the answer for the Colts. And with an ambiguous wide receiver core behind the oft-injured veteran T.Y. Hilton. Get out. You were so late on that. I was late. Back.
I was late on that. I was late.
I should buzz you back for that. With ambiguous wide receivers behind T.Y. Hilton, Strachan checks enough boxes for him to be on your radar. As more speculation than anything, a 7th round rookie just doesn't out of nowhere have the confidence to say, yeah, I'm the missing piece for a playoff contending team. I think he was told that. I think he was told that he was the missing piece. And in 2 years, his 22 games as a starter at Charleston, Strachan put up 126 receptions for 2,326 yards and 27 touchdowns. If you're taking a flyer on late round guys, don't take them on slot receiver do-nothings like Daz Newsome's or the Shi Smiths of the world. Take your shot and release the Strachan.
All right. I love that I love the in-depthness here. I love how deep you went on this pick. And I know you were talking about it before it was on the sleeper waiver wire. I always commend you for your deep picks because they usually start trending within, weeks or maybe a month sometimes. But
this was 2 months ago.
I do think that he is the missing piece the Colts are missing. I mean, they do need someone to sit on the bench and warm those spots up in the wintertime when it gets cold. And I just think there's other names out there that may do well, like for this team, other sleepers that I like Kylan Granson. I love Granson. And I mean, he ran over 55% of his routes in the slot. We're not going to dive too much into it because this is technically an Arizona projection sheet. This is just a deep cut of the week. So I'm going to end it at that. I'm not going to rain on the deep cut of the week parade. I'm just going to throw another name out there, Kylan Granson, as my deep cut. Not going to go into the abyss here in the deepness that Bradley just came out of, because we have DeAndre Hopkins.
The next. Depths of the sea.
Yeah. Let's give the people what they want to hear. Let's get back to the Arizona Cardinals.
All right. Very good. So look, it doesn't take, an elite fantasy analyst to tell you that DeAndre Hopkins is an elite wide receiver.
Hashtag good at football.
He's arguably the best, and he's been the best for a long time. Last season, Billy and I were both a little worried. Like, we were a little below, consensus with regard to Hopkins and the pie that he would get on a new team in a, COVID shortened off season. Those concerns were quickly laid to rest. Hopkins finishes the PPR wide receiver 4 and showed very strong chemistry with his new quarterback, Kyler Murray. Hopkins finished second among wide receivers in targets, second in receptions, 7th in red zone targets, 9th in yards per route run. He only had 1 drop. There's only one other player with 100 targets that had fewer drops, and that was Juju. Needless to say, there's not much concern about Hopkins going into 2021. He's an alpha. He'll be fed first, and he's my wide receiver 4 behind only Tyreek Hill, Calvin Ridley, and Stephon Diggs. Draft him with confidence. Draft him early. Know that you're going to get a very high floor and a very high ceiling wide receiver.
Yeah, I think Hopkins was probably one of the players I was the most wrong on last year, and I'll be the first to admit when I am wrong at a player or whatever, I've made an error. And Hopkins was one of those. I was fading him at his ADP last year. I had very little exposure in best ball, very little exposure in FFPC. Luckily, teams I drafted were able to overcome it. But had I picked Hopkins on 1 or 2 of those squads, we're talking about a major finish at FFPC in the main event. So I'm a little salty still. I'm a little bitter at my own analysis because it was a whiff. I was, quite frankly, and I'll be the first to say that. I mean, he finished as wide receiver 4 in 2020. He finished with 6 touchdowns. Second in receiving yards for the entire receiving corps in the NFL with 1,407. I mean, he's altogether a beast. I don't need to waste people's time here on DeAndre Hopkins. I'll just cover my numbers that I have him projected here for. 23% target share. I don't have him hitting the 150 mark again this year. I have him at 139.
Why do you hate DeAndre Hopkins?
Don't hate him. I just think that there's a few more mouths to feed. I do have him at 101 receptions. That needs to be adjusted there. And then I have him at 71% catch percent, 1,217 yards with 9 touchdowns. I do think he sees some positive regression in the touchdown category this year. I have him at 275 PPR points here and 17 fantasy points per game. He's going to be my top 4 wide receiver as well.
I'm even higher on Hopkins. I think I'm trying not to overcorrect from last year, but Hopkins is going to get 26% target share, and I have him at 26%, 159 targets, 115 receptions, 1,412 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns, and 305 PPR points. So about 30 more than where you have him there, Billy. And
that's, 30 fantasy points by the end of the year. I mean, it's not a large number, right? That's different than one major game.
Right. In a 17 game season, it's less than 2 points.
he has one big blow up game, and that's a gap,
For sure.
or in your scenario, in excess in points. But I love DeAndre Hopkins. I think that him and Kyler make a great pairing, and I'm looking forward to the 2021 season.
Awesome. We'll go to the next wide receiver that we'll talk about, and that's Christian Kirk. What to do with him? Well, I'll tell you what.
Well, I know what you did tonight with Christian Kirk.
Yeah,
why don't
you did.
Why don't you tell the guests what Bradley did?
So we're in a 32-team super flex league, and I bought Christian Kirk.
Single quarterback, not super flex.
Well, yes, it's you can play. You can play anybody in that. Yes, so technically it's one quarterback league, but you can play anyone there if your quarterback goes down. So it's 0 quarterback, 1 super flex position. I went out and I bought Christian Kirk for 3 second-round picks next year. One of them is a little earlier, and then 2 of them are much later in my projection for this league.
So we're talking like picks 40 to 70.
Yeah, probably. If we're being generous. So I went out and I bought him because I think that he's a buy low candidate at this point. But last season, before the DeAndre Hopkins trade, we thought he could take over. We saw the highest of highs. There was like a 3-touchdown game back in 2019 where Kirk just took over and Kyler they looked like they had the chemistry. And then DeAndre Hopkins and his 30% target share strolls into Arizona and poof, there goes Christian Kirk's 2020 season. Kirk let us down last year. He was a bulletproof prospect coming out of college with attributes of many successful wide receivers. However, he's not done enough to be one of those top 24 guys, but he's also done just enough to keep him on the roster. We've seen over the last few years, Arizona has released Hakeem Butler. They faded Keyshawn Johnson. They faded Andy Isabella. These are failed wide receiver picks. At age 24, Christian Kirk has been in the league for 3 seasons. He's only 24 years old. There's certainly plenty of time for Kirk to break out. But having ranked 58th, 38th, and 52nd among wide receivers of the first 3 years of his career, he may need a change of scenery. And that's what I'm buying. I'm buying that he'll have enough. And the wide receiver market will be hot next year when they'll pay him a lot of money to fill in more of a target share. But Kirk has a few underlying metrics which were pretty impressive. He was 24th among wide receivers in target separation. So he was a wide receiver 2 in that category. 25th in average target distance. So he was able to get down the field. 21st among all wide receivers in air yards per reception. And 43rd in fantasy points per target. As long as Hopkins is soaking up that 26 to 30% target share, Kirk is relegated to second fiddle. There's no doubt about it. But he's my 47th ranked wide receiver. And in a 32-team league, that's a wide receiver 2. So I went out and bought a wide receiver 2 in that type of league for 3 second-round picks. I Sure. But what are you getting in the second round? Maybe a backup linebacker somewhere. I don't know.
Anybody else?
Yeah. So I'd rather at least have somebody I know who will put up points. Christian Kirk will put up some points, and he had, I think, 3 or 4 games of 20+ PPR points last season. He also has his zeros. So love me some Christian Kirk. I hope he does really well. Hope he gets the bag next year.
Yeah, and I understand why you made the trade. You're banking on the change of scenery. You're banking on his next team, where he may go. Because he has had some decent seasons. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins kind of derailed any of the movement or hype that he had. There is one area in one metrics here that I think it needs to be pointed out, and that's red zone. So Christian Kirk is actually targeted in the red zone quite frequently. He was actually tied 18th overall out of all wide receivers last year with 14 red zone targets. And if you actually go to just end zone at that point, do you want to guess where he was at?
What?
It's a random guess.
14th.
No, I actually that was a loaded question. It was 33rd because he sucks. But it was
okay. Not everyone can be DeAndre Hopkins.
So real quick, I just want to take a look at my projections here. So I do only have him for 12% target share. I actually have him underneath AJ Green's, the ghost of AJ Green. So that's 12%. That's 73% or 73 targets here. That's 45 receptions, 541 receiving yards, 4 touchdowns, 125 full PPR points, and 8 points per game here for Christian Kirk.
Awesome. Yeah, I have Christian Kirk at a 19% target share, 111 targets, 70 receptions, 840 yards, and 5 receiving touchdowns. We have to remember, too, that Kirk has struggled with injuries, and especially the soft tissue ones. If he comes into this season healthy, like, he could be really dominant. It's just that it seems like he has like 3 or 4 game stretches where, yeah, he pulls a hammy or something's not right with his calf. And so that's certainly something worth monitoring. But yeah, I'm banking on, like, yes, like, I think Christian Kirk is a good best ball target. I don't know if he would necessarily be a great redraft target, relatively speaking.
I'd agree with that.
All right, Billy, let's talk about the ghost of AJ Green. You're trying to convince Fantasy Mojo Darren to draft some AJ Green, and he was not biting at all, even in the 17th round.
So that goes back to a question we had from PJ Kennedy, and he said, I told you I'd get back to this. No, that's the wrong one. Sorry. It's all the way up here. It wasn't PJ Kennedy. It was Hill Dog. Are the only other wide receivers in best ball only? And I think the answer for me, at least, is yes. I think that there is a possibility that Moore could, be this elite, or not elite, but this breakout rookie wide receiver. I'm not willing to take that gamble, especially with the amount of targets that somebody like DeAndre Hopkins is going to command. And now you have AJ Green here, who, let's face it, he had 114 targets last year. Yes, they were all shit targets, but nonetheless, he still had 114 targets. So I could foresee something like that happening again. I said it last show, and I called him a future Hall of Famer. It's up for debate. I looked like I was wrong on the Twitter polls. I think it was 2-1 in the no category. But
really, I thought he's a slam dunk Hall of Famer.
Yeah, so I think it was 65-35 was roughly the poll is no to
it's
yes.
The recency bias is eating into that. A lot of people have been hurt over the last 3 years.
If people are throwing Jillian Edelman's name out there, for crying out loud, you got to be able to throw AJ Green's name out there.
AJ Green
as well.
was one of the most dominant wide receivers for about a 6-year span.
Yeah. And I agree as well. I think he at least comes into consideration for this talk. But nonetheless, I can see something like when I talk about the targets that he may command, I can see a scenario where Kingsbury says, "Hey, we got to give AJ Green targets. He's a possible future Hall of Famer. We want to get him more involved." Where I can see where that really eats into the rest of these wide receivers. It eats into Christian Kirk. It eats into Rondale Moore. And that's why I'm just not really high on anybody else really outside of the running backs, Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah.
Best ball, different story. You don't have to pick and choose every week. You can take a dart throw. And Christian Kirk's going undrafted in a lot of these best ball drafts. AJ Green is going in round 17, round 18, final rounds in these best ball drafts. So I'm fine taking a stab and diversifying your portfolio and throwing in some of these wide receivers. Rondale Moore is a little rich for my ADP blood here, especially when I just talked about AJ Green and the involvement I think he's still going to have. So and let's also there's a little note here that we really haven't touched base on is that Larry Fitzgerald has not retired yet. It's expected, but it's not official. So
you're cutting me to the chase here, Billy.
Am I? I apologize. I didn't read through all your notes.
It's okay.
But nonetheless, answering the question, I think that the rest of these targets are best ball targets.
Yeah, I'm really low on AJ Green. He's my 89th ranked wide receiver. Only AJ Green and Jerry Jeudy caught fewer than 50% of their targets on more than 100 targets last season. And look, was it Joe Burrow's fault? Perhaps. Burrow really stunk throwing the ball like down the field. He was one of the worst downfield passers. Partly you wonder if it because he's targeting AJ Green, but aside from AJ Green, he still wasn't getting the ball like down the field, 20 yards plus. Nevertheless, I'd probably lean that Green's lack of success was due to his own lack of desire to be there. I mean, Didn't we see him saying on the sideline, trade me, right? Tagging Green last season was one of the most mind-boggling transactions among any of the clubs. Sans trading DeAndre Hopkins away by the Houston Texans. He's here now in Arizona. He's trying to prove he still has something left in the tank, mostly because I think his alpha status will demand early season targets, no matter how bad or dusty AJ Green is. He could be a 0. He could be a best ball target. I'm not in on AJ Green.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not fully in either. I'm just best ball target. I'm okay with it. That's about it.
Fine. Rondell Moore. He is their second round pick. He's an intriguing prospect. He's a slot machine. He's nicknamed the Ant-Man. He's like 5'7".
He's tiny.
He's very tiny, but he's also struggled with injuries throughout his collegiate career.
Tiny.
When you get hit by 260-pound linebackers. Per our partner at Fantasy Data Player Profiler, Rondell Moore is comped to T.Y. Hilton. He has a 96th percentile 40-yard dash, 96th percentile burst score, 94th percentile agility score, 93rd percentile college target share, and 99th percentile breakout age at age 18. He's only played, though, 7 collegiate games over the last 2 seasons. But he's absolutely dominated when he's been on the field, averaged about 100 yards per game. His underdog ADP has jumped from 144th to 133rd over the last 3 weeks. And look, he may slot into the Larry Fitzgerald role, but as you mentioned earlier, Billy, like Larry Fitzgerald hasn't officially retired, and there's actually been rumors that Fitz may return this season, and that would put a damper into Rondell Moore, put a damper into Christian Kirk, unless Kirk wins the outside job over AJ Green. I think that's the real thing. But Fitz has had 100 plus targets 2 of the last 3 seasons. There's no way that he returns and isn't a part of the offense.
I don't expect him to return. If he does, I got to redo my entire projection sheet.
I agree.
I don't see how he returns. Like, you don't go out and sign AJ Green. You don't go out and draft Rondell Moore if you expect Fitz to come back. It doesn't add up to me. I think it's just more, people holding out hope that he returns, just because he had such a beautiful career in the NFL.
Absolutely. He's a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, easily. I love Fitzgerald. And I think he is one of the best players in the game in terms of, personality as well. Nothing to knock him, but I just don't think he returns here for a final season. Who knows? I could be wrong though. For me, for Moore, in terms of target share, I have him at 12%.
Yep.
Roughly the same here as Christian Kirk. News out of camp, though, is that he is impressing. So these numbers might be bumped up as we get closer to week 1. But that's early preliminary numbers. Is going to be 73 targets, 49 receptions, 68% catch percentage, 757 yards. So I do have him at the second most receiving yards on this team. Only 3 touchdowns, though, but that's 147 fantasy points. That's 9 fantasy points per game. So a little under where he's being drafted at currently, but I just think that there is a speed adjustment to the NFL. I do expect him to miss some games with that size, cutting across the middle. It's going to hurt when he gets hit by that brick wall. And I just think that he's bound to hit at least one brick wall this season. And I think it could cause some problems with his small frame.
I'm a little lower on Moore. I think they work him in. He may finish the year as a starter, but I also have him at a 12% target share, but only 483 receiving yards, 111 PPR points. My wide receiver, 83. So a little bit above AJ Green, although I think there's more upside with Rondell Moore than AJ Green, like significantly more.
Yeah,
for more.
Definitely. Yeah, more.
I couldn't resist.
But
I couldn't resist. Okay.
Do we have to talk about the last one, really?
Yeah, I would like to at least dwell a little bit on it. Because last year when we talked about the Arizona Cardinals, this was the first lively debate that Billy and I really got into. We did not see eye to eye on Dan Arnold versus Max Williams.
I was a year early.
You were a year early on Max Williams, but I was a year on Dan Arnold. He was one of the most efficient tight ends in the NFL last season. But you've brought me over to the dark side, Billy. Call me bullish on Max Williams. He's my tight end 22. Tight end 22. Last season, the Cardinals threw to the tight end at nearly the lowest rate in the league, 12.5%. I have Williams, who's the only tight end on the roster with like pass catching acumen, at 11%. And I think Darrell Daniels at like 3 or 4%, whatever. He had a strong prospect profile. He was drafted in the second round of the 2015 draft by the Ravens. He posted a 98th percentile college dominator, 84th percentile college yards per reception, 89th percentile. I think I just copied and pasted your arguments from last year and just put them right here. Injuries have limited Williams to only one 16-game season, but after Dan Arnold departed and he went to the Carolina Panthers, obviously Max Williams finished last season he finished last season 5th in fantasy points per target among tight ends with at least 10 targets. Now, yes, I know it's a small sample size, but Dan Arnold finished 13th. So however the tight end is going to be used in this offense, like it's going to be the forgotten weapon, if you want to think about it that way. Essentially, they're going to get 2 to 3 targets a game, maybe 4 targets per game, and going to catch 2 or 3 passes a game, but one of them is going to go for like 20, 30 yards. And maybe hit the end zone. And that's all you need if you are completely punting the tight end position, or if you're in a 2 tight end league and you just need someone. Like Max Williams is going to be the starting tight end on an NFL team, and he has pass catching capability. So he might be on your waiver wire. Just if you got a really deep bench, you just stash him. I get it. There's not like a big appeal there, but it's something.
It is something. I liked him coming out of college more than now, but I mean, let's face it now, we're 6 years later, and it does take time for tight ends to develop. You took really the only notes I had on him because there's not much else to really say about Max Williams at this point in his career. I don't want to waste a bunch of time here on Max Williams. So I'm just going to say Bradley hit all the talking points. I'm only drafting him if I have like 3 tight end leagues. You're going to be able to pick him up on the waiver wires in 99% of your leagues. So I would just hold out, and then if you really need a tight end, just spend your fab money. I'm not going to go out and draft this guy. But the couple things. Speaking of, so let's look at real quick. This is actually the player that we're the most divided on in terms of our projections for Arizona Cardinals. I'm only at 6% target share, 36 targets, 17 receptions, 143 yards. It might be a little low, but I'll take another look at that. 1 touchdown. That's 37 fantasy points for the season with 2 fantasy points per game.
Whereas I have him at an 11% target share, as I mentioned earlier. It's still it's still relatively low compared to Hopkins and Kirk and Rondell Moore. I have him in the range of AJ Green, though I have AJ Green like pegged there because I anticipate he'll miss, games. I have Max Williams at 66 targets, which if you do the math ends up being less than 4 targets per game. It's going to be closer to 3 targets per game. 3.5, 44 receptions, 578 receiving yards, because he's a downfield threat, and he'll also catch some touchdowns. So 3 touchdowns on the season. We saw Dan Arnold get, 2, 3, 4 touchdowns. Big framed dudes. These are tight ends that you just send in the end zone, corner of the end zone, you plop in, and Kyler Murray just trusts the tall guys to get it.
And so before we wrap up here, I do want to show the new tool that we have here on Fantasy Data. So I'm going to go ahead and share our screen here. And I'm going to get rid of our names so that way people can see. Oh, they were already gone anyways. And let me zoom. Does that need to be zoomed in a little bit? Yeah. That's a little too much. Okay, let's just go. Now it's frozen. Beautiful. Okay. Well, okay, too far. Let's go in a little bit more. So the beauty about this is you can take a look at projections that we have for our overall, and this is not just Bradley's and I projection. This is fantasy data's. We have we have quarterback, we have running back, wide receiver, tight end. So all your positionals at the top, including IDPs for all you IDP players. But this is the nice feature that I really like, especially for somebody like me who's drafting, 150 to 200 leagues a year, whether it's best ball or it's redraft, whatever it may be. There's an ADP tracker on here. So you can actually take a look at where they went in the last couple of weeks. So we have 621, 628, 75. And you can see how they're trending. You can also see where they were drafted at their high point. You can also see where they're drafted at their low point, and their average draft position. The other cool tool on here is where they finished at, their positional finish. So, of course, Christian McCaffrey being drafted at the ADP 1.3 to be exact. Finishes running back 51. We all know that was an injury. I know that there's some more coming onto that where you're going to be able to highlight over that and see the notes on the player. So a lot of cool features here. And then you have all your strengths of schedules and other tools here on the right. Again, if you click on the player, you can actually go into all their statistics here, see their numbers like their touchdowns, their rushing yards, their breakaway percentage, their in-season game logs. And you can be an analyst yourself like Bradley and I are and dig deep into the efficiency metrics from there. It's a rabbit hole, folks. You're going to get lost. Grab a bottle of wine, grab a White Claw, whatever you want to drink, and just sit here and digest this information because there's a lot of information and data at our fingertips here that you have on these fantasy data tools, which you can also get 20% off if you use the promo code FFF20. And it stacks right now. Wow, my microphone just fell. It stacks right now. So there is an early bird discount on there, and you get an additional 20% off on that number as well. So if you are thinking about it, you're on the fence, make sure to take advantage of it now while you can. Otherwise, I think that early bird discount goes away pretty soon. Well, Bradley, I actually like doing just one team at a time. It gives us a little bit more to really dig in deep and take a look at these. Last year we were crazy and we tried to do 4 per night. And it was just
4 in it was a marathon. And then I think didn't we do one where we threw like 10 teams into one at the end, right before the end? It was like, oh my gosh, we need to talk about all the quarterbacks from these 10 teams.
Yeah, we didn't make it. I think we started a little like a week or two later than we did this time, and we were trying to do all the teams. And then we had requests to do ranking my dynasty leagues, and we were sneaking in rankings for leagues, and I was like, you know what? Let's just do like a marathon. Let's just do like all these teams at once. And it was actually our most watched show of the preseason, which was hilarious because we just sped through them all. People were like, I don't care about everything you have to say about every player. Let's just hear the big picture.
Well, just as a reminder for our listeners, now that we're into July, as Billy mentioned at the top of the show, we'll be doing a lot more of these, more than once per week. So keep your eyes out for more content, both videos and audio. You can find us on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Spotify. Find our YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed, like it, give a positive review. We appreciate that because that helps us, of course, do better. And is there anything else, Billy?
Yeah, last thing I want to just point out for everybody is I updated our Patreon account. That's going to be the Fantasy Football Fanalist. You can also, if you got our YouTube page, you can just click at the top and find it. But there's a lot of benefits in there. You actually get access to Bradley's and I spreadsheets for our projections. That's going to be our statistics, every single team. That's all 32 teams in the NFL. And then we're going to be updating our positional rankings here as we get closer to August. But those do get updated frequently. And if you have access to it, we just share a link. And as they get updated, you get immediate access to them as well. And I think that comes for as low as $5 a month on our Patreon, which comes with other benefits as well. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter. We'd be more than happy to answer those for you. I think that's it, Bradley. Make sure to tune in for our next show. We're going to be doing the Atlanta Falcons. We'll probably post that one. It may not be a live one here. So some are going to be live, some are going to be uploaded. So just keep your eye peeled. Uploads will be at our YouTube channel. So like Bradley said, smash the like and subscribe button there to get the most up-to-date content from Billy and Bradley and Fantasy Data. And we appreciate all of your participation, all of your guys' interactions here on the show. And we appreciate everything that you do for us as the analysts. Have a good night, and we'll see you